For centuries, sovereignty has been tied to territory. Nations govern land, coastlines, airspace, and territorial waters through legal systems backed by police, courts, and governments. Every person lives within a framework of laws that determine rights, responsibilities, taxes, employment protections, and criminal accountability. But as humanity expands into space, a new question is emerging. What happens when people begin living and working in places that no country truly owns? The modern space age began under a legal framework created during the Cold War. In 1967, the Outer Space Treaty established the basic principles governing activities beyond Earth. The treaty declared that outer space belongs to all humanity and cannot be claimed as sovereign territory by any nation. No country can plant a flag on the moon and legally declare ownership. Space was intended to remain a shared domain rather than becoming another arena for territorial conquest. The treaty worked reasonably well when only governments had the ability to reach orbit. During the 1960s and 1970s, space activity was dominated by national space agencies such as NASA and the Soviet space program. Today, however, the situation is very different. Private companies are becoming major players in launch services, satellite networks, lunar exploration, orbital manufacturing, and the development of commercial space stations. The International Space Station demonstrated that long-term human habitation in orbit is possible. For more than 2 decades, astronauts from multiple nations have lived and worked aboard a permanently occupied orbital facility. However, the ISS operates through agreements between governments. Future stations may look very different. Several private companies are already developing commercial space stations intended to replace or supplement the aging ISS during the coming decades. Supporters see enormous opportunities. Private stations could host scientific research, pharmaceutical development, advanced manufacturing, tourism, entertainment, and commercial services. Some companies envision entire orbital business parks where organizations lease laboratory space, much like renting office space on Earth. Others imagine hotels, industrial facilities, and eventually permanent communities in orbit. As these plans become more realistic, legal experts are increasingly examining how existing laws apply beyond Earth. Contrary to some popular claims, private space stations are not completely lawless. Current international agreements generally require spacecraft and stations to remain under the jurisdiction of the nation where they are registered. A station registered in the United States, for example, would still operate under American legal authority in many respects. However, jurisdiction in space is far more complicated than jurisdiction on Earth. If a station contains modules owned by multiple countries, determining which laws apply becomes more difficult. If workers come from different nations, legal responsibilities become even more complex. Questions involving labor disputes, intellectual property, criminal investigations, medical ethics, and commercial contracts may not always have straightforward answers. Employment law provides one example. On Earth, workers generally benefit from national labor protections involving wages, safety standards, working conditions, and dispute resolution. Future orbital employees may work for multinational corporations operating across multiple jurisdictions simultaneously. Determining which labor regulations apply could become a significant legal challenge. Medical ethics creates another area of uncertainty. Long-duration space habitation will require extensive medical monitoring and experimentation. Researchers may study the effects of microgravity, radiation exposure, artificial gravity systems, and human adaptation to space environments. While ethical guidelines already exist, future commercial pressures could create conflicts between scientific opportunity and individual rights. Taxation presents another important issue. Governments typically collect taxes based on residence, citizenship, income generation, or corporate activity. Orbital businesses operating across multiple jurisdictions may challenge existing tax frameworks. Nations are already struggling to regulate global digital companies. Space-based corporations could create even more complicated questions regarding revenue, regulation, and taxation. Intellectual property may become particularly valuable in orbit. Certain manufacturing processes work differently in microgravity environments. Pharmaceutical research, advanced materials development, semiconductor production, and biotechnology experiments may produce commercially valuable discoveries. Determining ownership and legal protection for these innovations could become increasingly important. Some analysts compare future orbital facilities to historical frontier environments. Throughout history, new territories often developed faster than legal systems could adapt. Maritime trade routes, colonial settlements, the early internet, and international waters all experienced periods where regulations lagged behind technological and economic development. Space may follow a similar pattern. The concept of orbital sovereignty has therefore attracted growing attention. True sovereignty means possessing ultimate authority over a territory. Under current international law, private companies cannot legally declare independent nations in orbit. Nevertheless, economic influence and practical control sometimes create situations that resemble sovereignty even without formal recognition. Large corporations already manage extensive infrastructure on Earth. They operate communication networks, transportation systems, energy facilities, cloud computing services, and digital platforms used by billions of people. If future companies control critical orbital infrastructure, their influence could extend far beyond traditional commercial activity. Space manufacturing may accelerate this trend. Certain products can potentially be produced more effectively in microgravity. High-purity fiber optics, advanced pharmaceuticals, specialized alloys, and biological materials are among the areas receiving significant research attention. Commercial success in these industries could make orbital infrastructure economically important. Resource extraction could further increase the stakes. Future mining operations on the Moon or asteroids may eventually depend on orbital processing facilities. While large-scale space mining remains speculative today, many governments and companies are already positioning themselves for potential future opportunities. Security introduces another layer of complexity. Police forces operate within defined territories on Earth. In orbit, emergency response becomes far more difficult. If serious crimes occur aboard private stations, enforcement may depend on cooperation between multiple nations separated by hundreds or thousands of miles. Practical realities may complicate legal authority. The challenge becomes even greater as stations grow larger. Early commercial stations may host only a few dozen people. Future habitats could eventually support hundreds or even thousands of residents. As populations increase, demands for governance, representation, dispute resolution, and community management will also increase. History suggests that permanent settlements often develop distinct political identities over time. Communities facing unique environmental conditions frequently seek greater autonomy in managing local affairs. While large-scale orbital societies remain decades away, discussions about governance structures have already begun among legal scholars and futurists. The military dimension cannot be ignored. Space already plays a crucial role in communications, navigation, intelligence gathering, and national security. Governments are unlikely to tolerate completely independent orbital entities operating outside regulatory oversight. Strategic concerns will almost certainly shape future legal frameworks. For this reason, many experts believe existing treaties will eventually require revision. The Outer Space Treaty was written during an era when private orbital cities seemed impossible. Modern realities involving commercial stations, private astronauts, and corporate space infrastructure are creating questions the original treaty never anticipated. The most likely future is not one where corporations completely escape Earth's laws. Instead, it is a future where governments, companies, and international organizations negotiate new frameworks for activities beyond Earth. The challenge will be balancing innovation and economic opportunity with accountability and human rights. Yet the underlying issue remains significant. Human civilization is expanding into an environment where traditional concepts of territory, citizenship, and sovereignty become increasingly difficult to define. Space forces humanity to reconsider assumptions that have governed political systems for centuries. The first private space stations may not become sovereign states. They may not operate beyond all law, but they represent the beginning of something historically unprecedented: permanent human communities living outside the natural jurisdiction of any territorial nation. How humanity governs these communities may shape the future of civilization beyond Earth. The era of orbital sovereignty is therefore not simply about technology. It is about law, authority, rights, and governance in environments where old assumptions no longer fit. As commercial stations rise above the atmosphere, humanity faces a challenge unlike any it has encountered before. The next frontier may not be a battle over territory, but a debate over who writes the rules when there is no territory at all. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the forces shaping our future, be sure to explore our other documentaries examining the technologies redefining modern civilization. And if you want to keep exploring the biggest questions about science, power, and the future of humanity, make sure to subscribe to the channel and join us for the next journey into the unknown.